Okay, so we've added some trees to the scene, and that's cool. Um, but what we're going to do now is add like a component to the scene. So we're going to add like a child scene into the scene. So this is where Godot can be kind of confusing, but it's also where it's really powerful, is that we have the ability to create a component that we can use in a lot of different scenes. And the reason we need to do that, if you've played any video game, you know that there's usually like a main character or different characters that you can choose. And those characters look the same and have the same behaviors, regardless of like what level or what part of the game you're on. And so in order for that to work, we don't want to have to recreate the same player or character or enemy every single time we create a new level. Instead of what we do is we create components, which are like little separate scenes that we can put into lots of different scenes. And so that's what we're going to do now. We might not get to this we're probably not going to finish the whole thing, but I just want to create this component or get it started, and then we'll wrap it up on Tuesday. So the way that I'm going to do this is by creating a completely new scene. So I'm not building inside the scene I'm already created like I have been with my forest. I'm going to create a new scene and then make what's called an instance or a copy of that scene inside of my first level here. So to do this, I'm going to go to my scenes folder first, and as I've mentioned, I want to make sure I have everything really nice and organized. So I'm going to be creating this new component that I'm going to put in a lot of different scenes. And even though it is a scene itself, I want to separate it from my other scenes. So what I'm going to do is make a new folder again. So I'm going to right click on scenes and go to new folder, and I'm going to call this components. So it's kind of a big word, but it's just like, different components of the game that are going to be used in multiple scenes. So I'll call this components. And then inside of my components is where I'm going to put my player scene, at least just to get started. So I'm going to right click here, and now I'm going to create a new scene. So I'm going to click on new scene, and this is going to be my player. And this player is going to be, in the game, basically, uh, you know, uh, in all of the different levels and stuff. So here's my new scene up here, and wait, where did it didn't keep the player? Let me try that again. So I'm going to go to components, go to new scene, call this player. For some reason, it still says empty here. Let me try saving. Oh, I guess I still have to create a node. So let's create a node first and then see what happens. So for my player, I'm actually not going to use a default node. For my player, what I'm going to use is a different type of node. So it's under this other node category. And what the player is called is a Kinematic Body 2D. Kinematic is basically just like a fancy way of saying it has physics, like it can move in space, like it can stand on things and things can bounce off of it and stuff like that. So if I use a kinematic body instead of just a regular node 2D, it allows me to apply physics to the player, which we'll do eventually. So I'm going to choose kinematic body 2D and click create. And I have like a little warning here because when you make a kinematic body 2D, there's certain things that you have to make sure it has set up with it, which I haven't done yet, but that's okay. It'll tell me what I need to do. So it says you have to have a collision shape. So you have to have some shape that tells Godot how this player interacts with the rest of the physics in the game engine. But before I do that, I'm going to click on this node and hit enter to rename it. So I'm going to call it player. And now I'll go ahead and add in my collision shape. So to do that, I'll click on the player, click the plus sign, and it already told me this, but I need a collision shape 2D. So I don't want collision polygon 2D, I want collision shape 2D. This is basically just a shape. You don't see it in the game, but we see it on the game editor, and it defines the boundaries of the player. So you guys have probably heard like the term hitbox before. This is like, what? No, so the hitbox is just like it just describes an area of the game. So you don't actually see it. It's not part of the graphics, but you can kind of know where it is because when you like attack a player or something like that, you want to get it doesn't register as an attack unless it's inside of the hitbox. So you'll hear people talk about like the hitbox of a player being like, not made right or not in the right place or, moving or something like that. This isn't actually the hitbox. This is just like the boundary of the player. So it's like in a game, when we're walking around, like we're experiencing actual physics. Like if I run into a wall, the actual like parts of my body hit the wall. In a game, there's no actual physics. It's just a computer, projection. So to recreate those physics, we use shapes to define like if this shape runs into this shape, then they can't pass through each other or whatever, they bounce off each other, something like that. And so the art and the actual collisions are separate things. The art is not what's running into stuff. These other like shapes that we're adding are what actually tells the game engine when something's running into something else. So that's what a collision shape 2D does. And we'll talk more about this when we go over physics. But I'm just going to create this collision shape here. And then this guy has a little warning that says I need to add a shape to it. So for my player, I'm going to go over here to the inspector, and I'm just going to choose whatever shape matches my player the best. I made that little weird cat drawing, so I'm going to use a circle for this one. But when we update our art, we might use a different type of shape. So I'm just going to use a shape for today. And here's this little blue shape, and that's like what the game engine thinks of as kind of like the shape that the player has. So again, it's just represented to us as editors so we can see what it looks like, but it won't actually show when you play the game. So I have my collision shape, and now I just need some artwork to show where the player is. So for now, I'm just going to add in a sprite, but eventually we'll add an animated sprite. So I'm going to click on the player node again and click plus and type in sprite and create the sprite. And now for the sprite, I need to go find the image that I created. So I made the image on Tuesday. Go to my desktop and get rid of all this stuff. So I have my game folder here, and I have my art folder, and here's the sprite that I created. Let's use this one. So I'm gonna copy this. I could drag it over, but I don't want to like lose it over here. So I'm going to go back to my game and go into sprites and then paste my avatar. And I can just close this out. And then when I go back to Godot and I open my sprites folder, now I have an actual sprite inside my sprites folder for the project. So then I can click on the sprite again. And now I want to do the same thing I did with the tree. I'm going to go over to the texture, click the empty, and go to load. And then go to sprites and choose my avatar. And there it is. It looks kind of weird. Let's put it above the collision shape. I guess it's just kind of big. Huh. Let's click on this. 64 by 64. That's fine. I guess that's kind of big for the game, but it looks kind of. Oh, you know what? Maybe is this? Do I have a step for this? Okay. I need to add a step for this. Okay, so when I add a sprite in here, do you see how it's supposed to be like pixelated, but do you see how it looks like all fuzzy? So that's actually called like aliasing or anti-aliasing. When you have a graphic, like the computer's trying to make it look better by like kind of like smoothing over the edges. But with pixel art, that's not really what we want. And so actually this is another thing we can go over. So the reason it looks like that is because when I imported it, it probably added a filter to it. So if I click on that image, the PNG, and go to my import tab, so the import tab is next to the scene tab. And if I scroll, yeah, here we go. So it has a filter on, which we don't want. So let's turn that off and then re-import it. And there we go. Now we have our nice pixels. Um, so let's go back to the scene. And one thing I can do to prevent that from happening in the future, if I go to project and project settings, and where is this? Um, import defaults. So if I go to my texture import, I can turn the filter off. So if you're working with pixel art, you'll want to do this. If you're not working with pixel art, you probably will want to leave it. So if I turn that filter off, then I don't have to turn off the filter for every image that I import. I'm going to save that and close. Okay, so now my cat looks nice and pixelated. And then I want to make sure that my collision shape relatively matches the size of the cat. Notice that it's like going from very big to very small. It's snapping because I still have my grid turned on. So I'm going to turn off my grid so that I can match this a little bit better. And we basically want to make sure when we have a collision, we don't want it to be outside of the art because that'll look weird. If you run into a wall before the art has actually gotten there, it's going to look weird. You'd prefer to have a little bit of overlap. So I want to make sure that it matches as close to the outside as I can get without going over. So if I go over here, then I don't want that. So I have to go in a little bit. And I can also move this if I want to center it. That's fine as well. And I usually kind of cheat more to the inside. I'd rather have overlapping art than weird collisions. Okay. We've created our player scene. Let's dump it into our program or into our main scene. And then I think we probably won't have time to do the rest of it. So we'll just do that next week. But we can do this. So I'm going to go back to my first scene. And so now we're going to do what's called creating an instance of the player in the scene. So this is what I was talking about before. When we have one player in a lot of different levels, this is the way that we can make that happen. Because when I make edits to the player in the player scene, they'll translate to all of the other levels that the player is in. So I'm going to go back to my first scene. So I was on my player tab here. I'm going to go back to my first scene. And the way I do this is not with the plus button, but with the link button. And so the link button, rather than adding a brand new node, it's called instance a child scene. It adds in another scene from my project into this scene. So I'll click on my first scene, click the link, and then what you see here is all the assets. There's a bunch of scenes in there, but I want to make sure I'm not using stuff from the assets. I'm using the component that I just created. So I'm going to scroll past all of these assets and just look. Here is my scenes slash component slash player. So I'm going to open that. And there's my player. It is a little bit too big. I should probably make the art smaller, but it's okay. But yeah, let's move the player. So I can move the player around. And so yeah, if I make changes to the player, like if I wanted to scale the player down, if I want to make the cat look more like the size of the trees, what I can do is edit the player and it'll edit all the instances of the player. But I can also change the player inside the scene and it'll only affect that particular instance. So let me give a couple examples of that. I'm going to fix the art real quick. So as I mentioned before, if something is too big or too small, the right way to do it is to fix the art, not to use the scale in Godot, because that's going to make your game do extra work. So what I'm going to do is just go to the art folder, and this is going to be super fast because I have my Pascal file. I'm going to open this up, although I actually don't think I can open it this way. I don't think it'll let me do this because Pascal is kind of weird. Let's see. I changed the icon, but it didn't actually open. Okay, so I have to open Pascal first. So I'm going to go to my Pascal folder, open up Pascal, and then I'll just go to import and get my Pascal file. So there's my avatar file. And so I'm just going to scale this down. So I'm going to go to resize, and I'm going to say resize canvas content. If I didn't do that, I'll show you what will happen. I'm going to scale this down to 32 by 32. So if I don't resize the canvas content, it's going to like zoom into one part of the image, which is not what I want. Let's actually save a copy of this so I don't overwrite the original. So I'll call this avatar small. and click Save As. Okay, so now I'm just going to delete that first frame, go to Resize, go to 32, and I'm going to say Resize Canvas Content, Resize. Oh, that looks weird. I guess scaling down is not always going to be good. Let's try that again. Or maybe, Okay, let's try it again. Yeah, it looked kind of weird, but I'm just going to go with it for now. So I'm going to save that and export and turn the scale down. So download avatar small. So I have this image now. And so now I have to import this again. So I'm going to go to my game, go to the art. There's my small avatar. So I'm going to copy that and go back to the game, go to sprites and paste. Fortunately, this isn't what we'll use for the main thing. So then I'm going to leave here. And now since I turned on the filter default, it should look fine, although it looks kind of crappy already anyway. Anyway, so I'm going to go to the player, go to sprite, and change out the texture. So just refresh the texture, go to empty, go to load, go to sprites, get my small avatar. And then I'm going to fit the collision shape again. Okay, that looks a little bit better. So now if I save this player and I go back to the scene, it already automatically updates. So changes that I make to the player scene will update in all of the scenes that the player is in. But changes that I make to the player here only stay here. So the easiest way to show this is to change the color. So I can modulate the color of the art a little bit, but that's only going to be in this scene. If I go to the player scene, it's still going to be the way it normally. So that's the nice thing about using an instance is I can have like as many instances as I want of this player scene in all of my levels. And I can make changes to the player in different levels. Like some levels, the player might be able to jump higher or have different abilities. But the original player, we can edit and keep the same. So yeah, next time we'll actually add some functionality to move the player around. We didn't quite get there, but that's okay. We can do it next week. So yeah, I'm gonna stop recording now.